Throughout this week, our focus series on rediscovering the middle class is looking at what it means to be middle class today and asking whether longstanding assumptions about education, opportunity, and stability still hold true in 2015. Tonight, we're focusing on the significance of geography and how perceptions of class can change radically in the span of just a few feet. On any given day, this bit of North Shore beachfront is packed with people, exercising, chatting, or just staring out to sea. But near the stretch's northernmost end, there's a line that some are reluctant to cross, the point where Lynn ends and Swampscott begins.
I know nothing about Swampscott. I've probably never been past this sign.
Ricky Best lives in Lynn. To get to the beach, he walks down Eastern Avenue along the Lynn-Swampscott border. And when he reaches the water, he always turns to the right. Why not walk down one day and turn left instead of right?
Well, I don't know how to explain that, but it's just the way that we go, you know. We live in Lynn, we stay in Lynn.
The belief that something essential changes once you cross that line is deeply ingrained. Tony LoJudas moved to Swampscott from East Boston 4 decades ago.
Well, my wife was from Lynn, and she always wanted to live in Swampscott. And it was like upward mobility.
Here by the water, LoJudas says you don't really see the distinctions between Lynn and Swampscott. But inland, they're clearer.
But everybody knows that Swampscott is more desirable than Lynn because Lynn is an old industrial city that's still trying to find its way again. It's a working class neighborhood further in Lynn, whereas Swampscott is a little more affluent.
And the gulf between the two is growing. In 1979, per capita income in Lynn was 87% of the state average. Today, it's just 50%. Meanwhile, Swampscott is getting wealthier, with income rising from 139% of the state average to 175%. For the people who live right on the border, that means straddling 2 distinct worlds.
Most of those imagined opinions come from people who don't necessarily frequent this area.
Josh Asikia's house sits in Lynn, but the house right next door is in Swampscott. He considers the Lynn-Swampscott line a place unto itself, a middle ground where caricatures of those two communities don't hold up.
Probably Lynn is a very dirty and lower class area, and view Swampscott as like completely upper class. Not necessarily. It's a working town as much as Lynn. And Lynn is a working city and family city as much as Swampscott.
But a few feet away on the Swampscott side, did you think about staying in Lynn at all?
No.
Will Brewster has a different take. He grew up in Lynn too and says moving across the line was important. What made you settle on this side of the line as opposed to the other side of the line?
It's kind of a hard question. Change of scenery. Better school systems for my son.
And that is more than just perception. Lynn's MCAS scores lag far behind the state average, while scores in Swampscott are well above. Along the water, it's a difference that's easy to forget. But it's another reason why, for some, Lynn and Swampscott really are 2 worlds apart. So what does the growing gulf between Lynn and Swampscott say about class perceptions? Joining me now is Paul Halloran, the managing editor of Lynn's Daily Item newspaper and a Lynn resident himself. Paul, welcome.
Thank you, Adam.
And I should mention that I actually used to work at the Item. We didn't overlap, but I worked there for about a half a year. And I have lived on both sides of the Lynn-Swampscott lines.
So you don't need me.
No, I do. I do. All right, recap for me your roots in the area. Are you a Lynn native, born and bred?
No, I moved to Lynn in 1993. I worked at the Item from 85 to 2000 and recently came back 3 months ago.
Okay.
Moved to Lynn in 1993.
From where?
Woburn.
All right.
Coached baseball in Swampscott for about 15 years. Very familiar. My wife is a Swampscott public school teacher. So pretty entrenched in both communities.
All right, so given that vantage point that you have, what stereotypes or misconceptions do people in Lynn have about people in Swampscott and vice versa?
I think the predictable ones. You know, there are some who think that, you know, the Swampscott people think that they're high and mighty, and then there are others the other way around. But I don't think that's the majority whatsoever. I think over time that it's really not a case of perception being reality. I think it's just simply perception.
What about the idea, and we heard this from Tony LoJudas in the setup piece, the idea that people grow up in Lynn, but they want to move to Swampscott, and that's what they do when they've sort of made it. I mean, your own example would suggest that's not necessarily the case, but is there a grain of truth there?
I I'd say perhaps a little bit. You know, there's a lot of people from East Boston and Swampscott. I think Tony LaJudas is one of them, and Revere. You know, I know a lot of people in Marblehead in Swampscott from Chelsea. So, you know, you have these migratory patterns, if you will. So I don't think it's any different in Swampscott than it is anywhere else. But do some people move there? Yeah. Do I hear a lot of that in Lynn? You know, my goal is to get out and get to Swampscott. No, quite frankly, no. Let me ask you, just as someone who used to live in Lynn myself, used to work in Lynn, what are some of the charms of Lynn specifically, say compared to a town like Swampscott? Lynn's obviously a bigger city. What are some of the charms that Lynn has that don't get appreciated enough? Well, I think some of the natural resources. I mean, Lynn Woods, people come from miles and miles around to run, walk, hike in Lynn Woods. Lynn has one of the best public golf courses in the state of Massachusetts, and Gannon, the Gannon course, yeah. Of course, Lynn, they share the ocean, both the cities, Lynn and Swampscott share the ocean, but Lynn is really making a comeback, if you will. The downtown in the last 10 years is about 300 to 350 new residents living in the urban center. Lynn Memorial Auditorium at City Hall was rehabbed about 10 years ago. They put air conditioning in last summer. They're getting some big name concerts. I saw the Irish Tenors there right before Christmas. So restaurants are coming. So there is a bit of a renaissance going on. And as that happens, as you just mentioned, that's sort of a return to the past, right? Because it used to be that Lynn was a big shopping area, and people from Swampscott and Marblehead and other suburbs would head there all the time, right? Right, and I think that ship may have sailed because of the malls. Yeah. You know, the Main Street shopping is tough to find anywhere, but entertainment and dining are really two big pieces, and arts and culture. Lynn has a very vibrant arts community. A lot of artists have moved there. Maybe people who were in the South End or Cambridge and could find cheaper live-work space in Lynn. Lynn Arts and Raw Arts, which is a program for youth, both have really done very well. So there's a lot going on downtown. All right, last question for you just briefly. Howie Carr famously wrote that everyone in Lynn says they live on the Lynn-Swampscott line, but no one in Swampscott says they live on the Swampscott-Lynn line. Is he right about that? Well, maybe some realtors would use that tack, but I don't hear it from many other people. All right, Paul Halloran, thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Thanks, Adam.